Well, hello, my kindred spirits. I am so glad that y'all are here with me today. Now, some of you may know that once a month I teach a back to basics class down at our little historic Sweet Harvest Homestead vacation rental that's on our property. And so each month is a different theme. And last month I taught a fermenting class, and I talked about making sauerkraut and cultured butters and lacto fermented vegetables. They're so good and nourishing for your gut. And so yesterday I had a class down there about living on one income. So for those of you who are soon to be mothers, or you want to have one parent stay at home while the other person goes out, while the other parent goes out and earns an income, living on one budget, one income is very important to know how to do. And we did that for years. And so I always want to teach younger women what I learned, and some of my mistakes that I've made along the way. So, with that said, this is an ASMR channel, so it's primarily for relaxation. But you know, the old homeschool mother in me can't let you leave here without learning something too. So, many of you told me that you just enjoy listening to the videos as you're busy doing a task in your house. And if that's the case, or if you're just trying to fall asleep, just turn that phone over so that you don't have to see the bright screen and just listen to my voice, because I've got a lot to say and maybe it'll help you fall asleep. But more importantly, I do hope that you learned something from this, and because it's important to know how to budget your money and save. And so I think that you may get something out of this. So let me share with you some of my notes. I have quite a few notes here that I took and taught from yesterday, and I'm going to be referring to them, so you'll see me looking down quite a lot as we go through this. But I wanted to tell you too that I'm going to be sharing some of the things that I did over the years, or we did as a family, to save money and to live on one income. But I want to tell you this with an understanding that we lived out on acreage and we were a homeschooling family. So some of these things that we did probably weren't as difficult for us as they could be for other people, because we weren't out in the mainstream, if that makes sense. So we were kind of sequestered, out here on our property, and we had other little friends, of course, but some of these things could have been a little easier for us. So just keep that in mind as you're listening to this today. But one thing I want to tell you too is, just with everything, just to embrace being different, because you're going to find that if you are on a really strict budget, or if you're going against what seems to be normal, you have to just embrace it, because it's going to feel weird and it's going to feel awkward when you don't go out and do the same things that maybe some of your friends or family do. People are going to think you're weird. But if this is a decision that you've come to in your family, that you want to do this, you just have to embrace it and just keep your shoulder to the wheel and keep working and just stay in your lane and just travel on like this, because in the end, you're going to be glad that you stuck to your guns and stuck with your budget, so that you could live on one income and stay at home with your kids for whatever reason you want to do that for your family. So just keep that in mind too. So the first tip that I have here is about budgeting, and it is very small, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But one of the things that I wrote down was just to put it down on paper. Don't use an app. Putting pen to paper, real pen to paper, helps you tremendously, and it helps you have a visual. You can put it on your refrigerator even, to see what you have coming in and what you have going out. So to make a budget, if you've never done it before, all you're going to do is write down your monthly income, and then you're going to subtract all of your monthly expenses. And one thing to make sure you don't forget are your subscriptions. They can eat you alive. That used to not be something I had to worry about very much, but it is something now that we do have to deal with a lot more often. You to just be able to buy things, and now you have to subscribe to things, and I don't like that subscription model, but it is what it is. So all that to say, I personally, I hated a budget, so I just did better just making myself spend less money instead of looking at that budget every day. But everyone is very different, so you have to do what is best for your brain. And if things don't work the first week or two in your budget, change it around and do something differently. But you have to keep working at it because it's hard. And don't feel like if you don't get it right the first 2, 3, 4, 10, 20 times, it doesn't matter. Keep trying because you will eventually get it. So one of the things that was huge for us was meal planning, because I wrote down here that food is a huge expense, and right now it's only gotten bigger. So these let me tell you this too, that these suggestions are for families without any dietary restrictions. So I can only teach from what I know, and if you have dietary issues, then this information may not be for you. But what I had my family do is I would have them tell me what their favorite meals were, what they liked for mama to cook. And so what I would do is I would write down every day of the week, I would write down a different meal. So for instance, this was our little family meal plan for supper every week. So on Mondays, we always had roast beef, potatoes, and green beans. Tuesdays, we had spaghetti and salad. Wednesdays was meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and peas. Thursday was big salad night. Friday was homemade pizza night and fruit. Saturday, we had savory bean soup and cornbread. And then Sunday, we would have baked chicken, fried apples, and slaw. And what we would do is we would serve those meals on a rotation on those nights for a month. And then I'd get tired of that and we'd switch it over to another 7 meals for a month. And what I found, first of all, was it was easy because I always knew what I was going to be fixing for supper that night of the week. And if I couldn't do it, if I couldn't get to it, my husband could help out, or as the kids got older, they could fix it. And that's very important too, to get those kids in the kitchen and get them to learning how to cook early on. I know it's hard in the beginning when you've got little ones, but if you can teach your kids how to cook, oh my goodness, you are working yourself out of a job, mama, and that is progress right there. So definitely teach them how to cook. But that was very helpful to have that meal, because these meals planned out for our suppers anyway, because again, we knew what we were having and we knew what we were going to be spending pretty much every week for our groceries. And then for breakfast foods, what we did was, I grew up not having typical breakfast fare for breakfast. We had everything. We would eat things like soup for breakfast, and we had cereal and things like that, but it was rare that we just had your normal typical American breakfast like eggs and bacon and toast and cereal and biscuits. We just didn't do that growing up. And so I carried that on as I raised my family. And so if you want to have leftover meatloaf and mashed potatoes for breakfast, by all means, heat that up and have that. But what we found later is having something like a breakfast smoothie was beneficial. And so what we would do was take just like 2 or 3 bananas and then some blueberries and then maybe a handful of spinach or kale and then a big scoop of natural peanut butter, and put that all together in a blender and mix it up really well. And it was so filling, first of all, and then second of all, we felt alive. We had all those good fruits and vegetables in our tummies, and we felt really good instead of tired like you do a lot of times if you have cereal for breakfast. So that was a very easy breakfast. And then sometimes we would do the same thing for lunch. If we would have maybe another smoothie along with our sandwiches, just something that was a little bit more filling for lunch, but not extravagant. And one thing too that I want to emphasize is that even if you have very simple foods, they can be enhanced by the addition of a pot of tea. And so, what we would do is if we had something like, for instance, just a burrito for lunch, because a lot of times I'd cook up a big pot of beans and we could eat on those all week. But we would make burritos for lunch and put a little cheese and a little bit of sour cream on there. And then, if I had a pot of tea and had some cream and a little bit of sugar for the kids to pour out too, somehow that fancy pot of tea made that simple fare of bean burritos nicer. And so it just kind of tricks your mind and makes you think that you're eating something fancier than what you are. So that's just a thought for you. So now for shopping tips. Okay, this is a biggie here too. Buying store brands is my favorite way to save. And I learned this years and years ago because I used to work at a grocery store, and I learned that the big companies I guess Lux is a national brand. I think that's a national brand. It's here in the Southeast. Or Bush's Beans, though that's a national brand, I think. They actually can the store brands and they label it. So, and I've done a comparison before too, and it's the same. It's the same product. A can of Lux green beans is the same as a can of, say, Food Line green beans or Great Value green beans. And so you can save quite a lot of money by buying the store brand. At least 60 cents a can, sometimes $1 or more per can. So try to only buy the store brands if you're trying to save money on your groceries. And then another thing that we did is we try to keep our food purchases mostly limited to the perimeter of the store. So, and I know in the beginning this is going to seem more expensive, but we would mostly buy fruits, vegetables, and meats. But eating things like that help keep you full for longer, and they also keep you healthier in the long run. And having your health is huge, and so that's going to cut down on illnesses and sicknesses, and it's going to keep you from having to go to the doctor so much, and so that's going to cut down on expenses as well. So another thing to remember, especially when you're cooking meals for your family, is to make it simple. You don't have to fix extravagant meals. Make it nutritious. So eliminate all refined foods. Try to make as many things from scratch as possible. And make it tasty, because tasty food is the spice of life. So experiment with different herbs and spices with your meals and make it attractive. So again, even if you're having beans and rice and beans because your budget is really tight this month, if you put out a tablecloth, or even if you don't have a tablecloth, you can put out a pretty sheet on your table and get out your best dishes and just try to get a centerpiece, even if you have to go outside and pick dandelions out of the yard or get a flowering branch off of a tree and put it in some water. A lot of times just the presentation is going to make a meal seem fancier than what it is, and you can take very simple foods and make them taste better if they're served with love and a little fancy presentation like that. So another thing, and this is something that we do right now on our Sunday dinners, are place cards. So it's said that the most beautiful word in the human language is the sound of someone's own name. And so if you know, if you they tell you if you're trying to establish rapport with someone, you should always try to remember someone's name and speak it when you're talking to them. The second best thing though is to make place cards and put your family's name on those place cards, or if you're having company, put their names on those little place cards. And it doesn't have to be fancy. Just get a piece of paper and make a tent out of it, and then just maybe draw a little picture with their name on it and then set it next to their plate, because seeing someone's name next to their plate makes them feel special too. And that's always nice to do. But one last tip about the family meal table is a blessings box. We still have our little blessings box, and I should have brought it up here to show you. But what we did was, I have an old 3x5 recipe card box that was my grandmother's. And so I bought a bunch of blank 3.5x5 cards, and I found a book that had little children's blessings in it. And so I would write on, one, God is great, God is good, let us thank him for our food. By his hands we must be fed, give us, Lord, our daily bread, amen, And I would put little stickers on it, and I tried to write it really clearly so that my kids could read it. And so the ones who could read would read off of that blessing box, and then we would just take turns going around the table. And if it was mine or Chris's turn, we would just pull out a little blessing and read it from the box. So that's a good way to say grace at the table, and it's a good way to teach your kids how to read too. So that's a fun little tip. Now, moving on to clothing management. So one thing that was helpful for us is having play clothes versus good clothes. And so my kids were outside most of the time, and they got dirty very often. And so we had a pair of galoshes for each of them, and then we had their play clothes. So that cuts down on having the wear and tear, first of all, of clothing, but second of all, you keep your good clothes for outings or church or special occasions, and then your play clothes are your play clothes. And so that keeps your good clothes clean and fresh. And so another thing though is to learn how to mend or even make things, because you don't have to throw away a pair of jeans just because they have a little rip in them. You can put a patch on them, and sometimes that's really neat looking nowadays. But as a family who's trying to live on one income, that can be a necessity. So learn how to make a patch in a pair of jeans, especially if you have little boys who get holes in their jeans very quickly. You can also, one thing that was very helpful to us is we had a friend who had little boys who were older than ours, and they would hand down their clothing to our children. And so that was a big savings. And then I, in turn, would bake bread, or anytime I had anything extra, if I had jams and jellies or anything like that, I would, in turn, give that to their mother, because it was kind of a trade-off, because she was going to get rid of those clothes anyway. And I was so grateful to receive those things. So that's another thing that you can do. And then also, you can participate in swaps. There are lots of swaps where mothers will come once or twice a year, maybe even more often, and you just open up the back of your car and you have your things labeled, and then the mothers just go around and swap out clothing. That's a huge, huge saver, because I've noticed too that clothing, the quality of clothing has gone down tremendously. I know for myself now, I haven't bought children's clothing in years, but I've been shocked at how things just wear out, and the quality is not there at all anymore. So those swaps are a really big deal and very helpful for your budget. Now, our next topic was entertainment and hobbies. So I wrote down on here that fun doesn't have to be expensive. As the old saying goes, money doesn't buy happiness. And like many old sayings, this one is true. But one of the things that we always did was we avoided buying expensive toys. So, four wheelers and boats and other high cost items. Instead, what we did was we rented them for special occasions. So, for example, we always thought we wanted to have a boat. And what we did instead, and I'm so glad that we did this, is we rented a boat. And because we quickly found out that we didn't want to go out on a boat any more than one time a year. So what we would do was we would go to the lake and we would rent a big pontoon boat and we would take the kids and their friends out on that pontoon boat. And we got one that was fast enough that you could pull skis behind, kids on skis. And then we just had the best time with that. And then we didn't have the expense of storing the boat in the marina, paying insurance on that boat, maybe even paying a note on that boat. And it was great fun, and we didn't have the stress of owning something like that. So, and then the next thing is home-centered hobbies. So I would encourage you to have hobbies that can be done at home, such as gardening, cooking, knitting, woodworking. They not only provide entertainment, but they also result in useful products or skills that can benefit the whole family. Another suggestion is to simplify your children's birthday parties. And I know this one can be very hard because things are so vastly different. But we did not have extravagant birthday parties for our children, and maybe that could include that could mean that if you have friends who do have those extravagant parties, you're going to have to make decisions on what you're going to do with that. But I have seen people blow so much money, and if you have the money to do that, go right ahead. But if you don't, please don't feel like you have to keep up with the Joneses and do that, because that can be a huge source of money spent, is those big birthday parties. So, and here's something else that I want to talk about is giving the gift of poverty to your children, and I'll explain. So when you have more than maybe you did as a child, giving things to your children is a temptation. So because we love to experience the joy of seeing our kids' faces when we give them something, but like a new iPhone or a new Xbox. I'll get it out in a minute. A new iPhone or a new Xbox, something expensive. It's a joy to see your kid's face when they get things like that. But the Bible and other ancient texts warn us the dangers of spoiling our children, and it's bad for their development, and it also can be bad for your budget. So provide your children with love, protection, guidance, food, shelter, and clothing. But if they want expensive brand name items, make them go to work and pay for it. And they'll soon realize the difference between overpriced brand name items and the stuff that they really need. Because remember this, what you have and what you earn doesn't always have to be relevant to what your kids get. And in the long run, I know this is hard, but it is going to be better for your kids. So, for instance, we did not buy our kids iPhones. They bought their own phones, and they couldn't have them until they were 15. In hindsight, I wish I'd waited till they were 18 to have them. But anyway, they couldn't have them until they were 15, and they had to buy them themselves. And that is helpful because it has made things like that has made every one of our kids frugal and much better stewards of their money. And so again, in the beginning it's a little hard to do that, but it does pay off in the long run. And let's see. And another thing too is that your kids are, it's kind of rewarding to hear our adult kids say now, and talk about their struggles as a badge of honor, and they're proud of earning what they got, and then it has kind of made them tougher too. So just keep that in mind. So another thing that I talked about yesterday was family road trips and outings. And for family road trips or special events, pack your own food for those things. And I'll give you an example. So my middle son Wesley and I, about 2 weeks ago, went to the Whitewater Center here in Charlotte. And that's not an inexpensive outing. It's about $150 a day for just two people. But it's lots of fun. We had a ball, and we're not on a strict budget like that anymore like we used to be. But what we did was I packed a little lunch for us. And so I packed some homemade bread and oranges and apples, and then we bought Gatorade while we were there. And so Wesley and I went on the whitewater rafting first, and then we had to wait for the second half of what we had paid for until our time slot. So we went and had our lunch. And as we were standing there eating, he told me, he said, "You know what?" He said, "I used to hate that we did this as a family when we went out as kids, because I wanted to go to McDonald's like everybody else. But," he said, "now I love it." And he said, "This is how I eat." And we both agreed, and that made me feel good, first of all, that he said that. But second of all, we both agreed that we felt better eating food like that, because we have eaten in that restaurant before at the Whitewater Center. And two things: it's overpriced, and we felt lethargic afterwards. And if you spent all that money on your day pass ticket, you want to have the energy to go around and do all the things that you've paid for. But if you feel tired because you ate a big old greasy hamburger, you're not going to feel as good doing all of those activities, especially not out in that hot sun. So pack a lunch, because that's a big deal. That's a big way to save money. So let's see what else I wanted to tell you about. And then just the last thing I want to leave you with is to avoid using your credit cards as much as possible. And you've heard this before. If you've listened to any sort of budgeting channels, you've heard this before, I know. But it is age-old wisdom. If you can't afford to pay cash for it, just try to hold off before you put it on a credit card, because the last thing you want to do is to have to make payments on something on down the road, because that is never any fun. So try to avoid using credit as much as possible. And keep this, last thing I'll say is keep the old Dave Ramsey philosophy in mind. Right now, you want to live like no one else, so that later on you can live like no one else. Meaning that if you can save right now and stay on a strict budget, later on you will have saved enough money to where, you can buy things and have a different lifestyle than everyone else who is going broke buying brand new vehicles and fancy houses and putting all of their furniture on credit. You can live with hand-me-down furniture and Facebook Marketplace furniture, and we had milk cartons as end tables when we were first married, so we were extreme budgeters back then. But anyway, I hope that some of that was helpful for you, and if it wasn't helpful, I hope it was at least relaxing for you. So if it was helpful and you enjoyed this video, I would really appreciate it if you would give it the thumbs up. I appreciate all of y'all so much. Your inputs and your comments that you leave, it means so much to me. So y'all take good care, my friends, and I will see you next week on the next video. Bye-bye.